Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. It wasn't something occasional or harmless, like wandering into the living room and falling asleep on the couch. It was the kind of sleepwalking that could have gotten me seriously hurt, or worse. We lived in a rough neighborhood, not the kind of place where a child should ever be outside alone at night, especially not half awake and unaware of where they were. Some nights I would wake up outside, not just on the porch or in the yard, but actually outside, standing somewhere in the dark with no memory of how I had gotten there. I'd come to with that awful sinking feeling in my stomach, the kind where your heart starts racing before your brain fully catches up. I'd look around, recognize bits of the street, and realize I wasn't home. Then I'd have to walk back by myself, step by step, trying not to panic, heading toward my house like it was a lighthouse in the dark. The worst part was always the doorway. More than once, I'd realized the front door was wide open, just standing there in the darkness, like an invitation. Anyone could have walked in. Anyone could have been waiting. I was a kid, small, vulnerable, and completely unprotected. Every time I crossed that threshold, I felt like I was walking into something unseen, like the house itself was holding its breath. Somehow, nothing ever happened during those nights. No one followed me. No one grabbed me. No one was inside the house when I came back. Looking back as an adult, that feels less like normal luck and more like something I narrowly escaped over and over again without realizing how close I came. But none of those nights, compared to the one that still stands out, burned into my memory more vividly than anything else from my childhood. I was about 9 years old. That night, I didn't wake up outside. I woke up inside my bedroom. At first, I didn't realize anything was wrong. I was standing up, which should have been my first clue, but my brain was still foggy, caught somewhere between sleep and waking. The room felt strange, different from how it usually did at night. Then I noticed the curtains. They were pulled back. That alone was unsettling. I never slept with the curtains open. Ever. I was afraid of the dark, afraid of what might be outside, afraid of the idea of being watched. My parents knew that and always made sure they were closed before I went to bed. Seeing them drawn open sent a jolt of confusion through me. I was standing right up close to the window, staring out. As I became more awake, my vision sharpened, and that's when I saw him. There was a man outside my window, not just standing there, but close, way too close. His face was almost level with mine, separated only by the glass. He was very large, bigger than anyone I knew. And the thing that struck me instantly was that he was completely hairless. No hair on his head, no eyebrows, nothing. His skin looked smooth and pale in the dim light, almost unnatural. He was staring directly at me. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in the wrong way. There's a moment when you wake up where reality isn't fully locked into place yet. Part of me wondered if I was still dreaming, if my mind was playing tricks on me. But that illusion shattered quickly, because he was moving, slowly. He leaned closer, inching toward the glass, his face coming nearer to mine. His expression wasn't angry or aggressive in the way you might expect. He looked bewildered, confused, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing, almost like he was trying to figure out whether I was real. That's when everything snapped into focus. I realized exactly what was happening. I realized I was awake. I realized I was standing at my bedroom window in the middle of the night. And I realized there was a grown man right outside my room. The fear hit me all at once. I started screaming. Not a controlled scream, not a single shout, but uncontrollable screaming. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in your body, where you aren't choosing to make noise, you just are noise. My legs locked up. I couldn't move. I was completely frozen in place. Pressed close to the window, my body betraying me in every possible way. I peed myself. I didn't even register it at first. My body was in full panic mode, doing whatever it was going to do without consulting me. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't stop screaming. I couldn't stop shaking. The man did not expect that. The look on his face changed instantly. That bewilderment turned into pure shock. His eyes went wide. He screamed too, this high-pitched, startled scream that didn't match his size at all. It was almost comical, except that at the time it was absolutely terrifying. He jumped back like he'd been burned. Then he did the strangest thing I've ever seen someone do in real life. He sort of tumbled, like a clumsy roll or a duck and roll move, as if he thought someone was shooting at him. Then he took off running down the street. But he didn't run normally. He zigzagged. He bobbed and weaved as he ran, ducking and swerving like he was trying to avoid imaginary bullets. Arms flailing, body jerking side to side, completely panicked. It was chaotic and surreal, like something out of a cartoon or a bad action movie. All the while, I was still screaming. The noise finally woke my mom. She burst into the room, turned on the light, and grabbed me. To her, it probably looked like I had just woken up from the worst nightmare of my life. I was hysterical, soaked, shaking, unable to form a coherent sentence. I tried to tell her what I had seen. I tried to explain that there was a man outside my window. But my words came out tangled and frantic. She thought I was still half asleep. She thought I'd had a night terror. She comforted me, cleaned me up, and stayed with me until I calmed down enough to sleep again. In the light, with the window just glass and darkness beyond it, it did start to feel unreal. Even I began to doubt myself. Had I dreamed it? Had my sleepwalking and my fear merged into something my mind invented? The next morning answered that question. On the front porch, there was a screwdriver. It didn't belong to us. The door jamb had damage. The door handle showed signs of tampering. Someone had tried to break in. Someone had been there. Suddenly, my screaming made sense. The open curtains made sense. The man's expression made sense. He hadn't been expecting a child to suddenly wake up and start screaming at him. He had been expecting a sleeping house, a quiet opportunity. Instead, he got me. Even now, thinking about how close that was makes my stomach drop. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't screamed, if my body had frozen silently instead of loudly, things could have ended very differently. At the time, my mom still brushed it off as mostly a nightmare mixed with coincidence. But as I got older, the truth of it settled in. I wasn't imagining things. I had come face to face with someone who intended harm, and my panic saved me. Years later, the fear transformed into something else. I still get a rush of adrenaline when I tell that story. I still feel that jolt in my chest. But now, more often than not, I end up laughing. Not because it wasn't terrifying, but because of how absurd it all became in hindsight. I will never forget the look on his face when I came fully to life and started screaming. I will never forget his high-pitched scream in response, and I will absolutely never forget his ridiculous ducking, rolling, dodging, and bobbing all the way down the street like he thought my screams were gunfire. It's one of those moments where terror and comedy collide in a way you don't appreciate until years later. As a kid, it was pure horror. As an adult, it's horror with a punchline. But underneath the laughter is the knowledge of how close I came to something much worse. How a sleepwalking habit, a bad neighborhood, and one man with a screwdriver nearly intersected in the worst possible way. I laugh now, but that laugh sits on top of a very real truth. That night could have gone another way, and I was only 9 years old. Back in 2009, when I was still in high school, something happened that I still think about whenever I hear stories about fake cops or people pretending to be authority figures. At the time, I didn't fully understand how dangerous it could have been. I just knew that it scared us badly enough that we never laughed about it afterward. Even now, when I replay it in my head, it still gives me that same tight feeling in my chest. It was supposed to be a fun trip. My friend's parents had taken us down to Ocean Shores for her birthday. It was meant to be a simple getaway, a change of scenery. We were all teenagers, excited to be away from home, staying in a hotel near the ocean. There were 4 of us kids on the trip, me, Jess, Cam, and Heaven. We were loud, silly, and feeling invincible in that way teenagers often do when adults are nearby, but not right on top of you. The day itself had been normal and fun. We hung out, talked, laughed, and did all the usual things. As the evening started to settle in, the sky changing colors, we decided we wanted to go down to the beach. Nothing wild. Just walk around, mess with the sand, watch the sun go down. Ocean Shores felt safe. It was a tourist town. Families everywhere, hotels lining the area. At that age, we didn't think much beyond that. We went down to the beach as the sun was setting. The light was that soft orange and pink glow you get right before it turns dark. The air was cool, the kind that makes you pull your hoodie a little tighter. The beach wasn't crowded anymore, but it wasn't completely empty either. There were still a few people scattered around, walking dogs or heading back toward the hotels. We were down there for maybe 30 minutes, just playing around, running near the water, laughing, talking about nothing important. It felt calm, normal. Exactly the kind of memory you expect to fade away without meaning much later. Then a big white truck pulled up next to us. At first, none of us really reacted. Cars drove on the beach sometimes. It wasn't completely unheard of. But this truck stopped close enough that it immediately made us aware of it. Too close. The engine stayed running. The windows were dark. The headlights were on, but angled in a way that made it hard to see inside. A man's voice came from the truck. He said he was police. The moment he said that, the mood shifted. We all went quiet. That teenage instinct to suddenly behave when you think an adult with authority is watching kicked in. He told us we needed to show our licenses, that he needed to see our IDs. His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't aggressive either. It was flat, controlled. We all looked at each other. None of us were thinking clearly yet. At that age, if someone says they're police, you assume they are. You don't immediately question it. You're taught not to. You're taught that police are there to help, and if they ask you for something, you comply. I was the only one who had my license on me. To this day, I don't even remember why I had it. I usually didn't carry it, but that night, for some reason, I did. When I realized that, I felt this strange mix of responsibility and fear. Like suddenly, everything depended on me. The man kept talking. He started asking us personal questions, where we were staying, who we were with, how old we were, why we were out there. The questions didn't feel like normal police questions. But at the time, I didn't know what normal was supposed to be. I just knew my stomach felt tight. He kept shining a light, but not the way a real officer would. The light stayed mostly on his face, not on us, not on the ground, not moving around, just enough that we could see a vague outline of him, but not clearly. The rest of the truck stayed dark. We couldn't see inside. We couldn't see if anyone else was there. Then he told us to come closer to the truck. That's when something inside me hesitated. I remember taking a step forward, thinking I should just go show my license and get it over with. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Cooperate. Don't cause trouble. I started moving toward the truck, holding my ID in my hand. And that's when Heaven grabbed me. She stopped me and said, quietly but firmly, "Don't go. This isn't right." That sentence changed everything. The moment she said it out loud, it was like something clicked for all of us at the same time. The questions replayed in my head. The way he was standing. The way the light stayed on his face. The fact that he was asking us to come closer instead of coming to us. The fact that there was no visible uniform, no badge, no marked vehicle. Fear rushed in all at once. We all started backing up slowly. None of us turned our backs yet, but we created distance. Someone said no. Someone else told him to go away. Our voices were shaking. We were trying to sound confident, but we weren't. Then everything flipped. Suddenly, the lights inside the cab turned on. The image burned into my memory. It wasn't a police officer. It was a large man and a large woman sitting in the truck. They were not in uniform. They were not official. They looked nothing like law enforcement. And the worst part was their faces. They were laughing. Not awkward laughing, not nervous laughing. They were laughing hysterically, loud, uncontrolled, like they found the whole situation hilarious. Like scaring a group of teenage girls on a beach was the funniest thing they had done all day. That laughter was worse than if they had yelled. It told us this was intentional. They wanted to scare us. They wanted to see our reaction. They wanted control. Every ounce of fear turned into adrenaline. We didn't wait. We didn't argue. We didn't ask questions. We ran. We booked it as fast as we could toward the hotel. Sand flying everywhere, hearts pounding, lungs burning. I remember glancing back once and seeing the truck start to move. For a split second, it felt like they were going to follow us. That alone almost made me trip. I had never felt that kind of panic before. The kind where your body takes over completely and your brain just screams move. We didn't stop until we reached the hotel. We burst inside, out of breath, shaking. Some of us started crying almost immediately. Others went quiet like the shock hadn't worn off yet. We told my friend's parents what happened, stumbling over words, trying to explain it all at once. The reality started to sink in after we were safe. Those people weren't joking in a harmless way. They pretended to be police. They tried to get us closer to their vehicle. They tried to isolate us. They tried to get at least one of us alone. If Heaven hadn't stopped me, I would have walked right up to that truck. I would have been close enough for them to grab me if they wanted to. That thought still makes me feel sick. We spent the rest of the night shaken. No more beach walks, no more joking around. We stayed in the room, doors locked, curtains closed. We talked about it over and over, replaying every detail, every word, every movement, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand what their intention really was. Or were they just cruel people who liked scaring kids? Were they predators testing how far they could go? Were they hoping we would trust them and follow instructions? We never got answers. What I do know is that experience changed how I saw the world. Up until then, I had believed that danger looked obvious, that bad people looked bad, that authority figures could be trusted at face value, that if something felt wrong, it probably wasn't that serious. That night shattered all of that. It taught me that some of the most dangerous situations don't come with alarms or clear warnings. They come disguised as normal, as authority, as something you're taught to respect and obey. It also taught me the importance of listening to that inner voice. Heaven didn't have proof. She didn't have logic laid out step by step. She just knew something was wrong, and she said it out loud. That one moment of hesitation, that one sentence, might have saved me from something much worse. Even now, years later, I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If we had been a little more trusting. If we had been a little more obedient. If I hadn't had a friend brave enough to speak up. We were lucky. I don't laugh when I think about it anymore. At the time, we joked afterward in that nervous way people do when they don't want to admit how scared they were. We even said, well, guess we won't do that again, like it was some silly teenage lesson. But it wasn't silly. It was a warning. It was a glimpse into how quickly a normal moment can turn dangerous. How easily people can misuse authority. How important it is to trust your instincts, even when you're young and unsure. Whenever I hear about fake cops or people impersonating officials, my mind goes straight back to that beach, the white truck, the flashlight on his face, the laughter when the lights came on. And I think about how close I came to stepping forward when I shouldn't have. We were just kids on a birthday trip, watching the sun go down. And for a few minutes, the world showed us a side of itself we weren't ready for yet. It's something I'll never forget. A couple of years ago, during one of those long stretches when summer feels endless and uncertain, I was desperate for a job. I had just finished school, and like a lot of people my age, I had almost no real experience. Every listing I looked at asked for things I didn't have yet. Experience, references, a background that proved I already knew what I was doing. After days of scrolling through job boards, sending out applications, and hearing nothing back, I started applying to anything that sounded even remotely possible. That's when I saw an ad looking for people willing to campaign. The wording was vague. It talked about flexible hours, good pay, and making a difference, but it didn't really explain what the work actually involved. I remember staring at the listing longer than the others, feeling unsure. I didn't really want to do it. Something about it felt off, or at least unclear, but at that point I was tired of being picky. I told myself I could always say no later. So I applied. To my surprise, I got a call back the same day. At first, I felt relieved. Someone actually wanted to talk to me. The person on the phone sounded upbeat and professional, thanking me for my interest and telling me they'd like to meet in person. They gave me an address downtown and said it would be more of an informational meeting than a formal interview. That alone struck me as a little strange, but again, I brushed it off. Maybe that was just how they did things. What really stuck with me happened a few hours before I was supposed to be there. I was at home getting ready, trying to decide what to wear, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was someone from the same place, asking if I was still planning on showing up. The tone wasn't rude, but it was urgent, almost anxious. I checked the time while they were talking. My meeting wasn't for another 2 or 3 hours. I remember laughing awkwardly and saying yes. Of course, I was still coming. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment with my phone in my hand, feeling confused. Why were they checking in so early? It wasn't like I was late or had missed anything. It made me uneasy, but I told myself they were probably just trying to confirm attendance. Maybe people bailed on them a lot. Maybe they were just overly organized. Still, the feeling lingered. When it was finally time to leave, I headed downtown. The address they gave me was in a part of the city I knew well. Busy streets, tall buildings, lots of offices and shops. Nothing about the area itself seemed dangerous or strange. If anything, that made me feel a little more at ease. I figured if something sketchy was going on, it wouldn't be happening in the middle of downtown. The building was tall, but when I walked inside, I was immediately thrown off by how small the lobby was. It was cramped and quiet. Not what I expected at all. There was a security desk tucked into a corner, and that was pretty much it. No big signs, no directory listing a bunch of companies, just a few elevators and a dull, almost forgotten atmosphere. I stood there for a second, looking around, trying to get my bearings. I didn't see the company name anywhere. No logo, no office plaque, nothing. Feeling awkward? I walked up to the security guard and asked if she could help me find the place I was looking for. I told her the name of the company. She frowned slightly, like she was trying to remember something that wasn't there. She admitted she wasn't familiar with it, but suggested it might be upstairs. She pointed me toward the elevators and told me which floor to try. That should have been my second warning. I thanked her and got into the elevator. As the doors closed, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just nervous. Job interviews can be stressful, especially when you don't know what to expect. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out and immediately froze. It didn't look like an office floor at all. Instead of a reception area or cubicles or even a hallway with business names on the doors, I was standing in what looked exactly like a residential apartment floor. The hallway was long and narrow, with dim yellowish lighting that made everything feel dull and heavy. Doors lined both sides, one after another, all looking exactly the same. No signs, no numbers that stood out. Just door after door after door. The air felt stale, like the place wasn't used very often. I checked my phone to make sure I was on the right floor. According to the directions, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I started walking slowly down the hallway, my footsteps sounding louder than they should have. With every step, my unease grew. I kept expecting to see something that would reassure me. A sign taped to a door. A poster. Anything that would confirm I was in the right place. But there was nothing. When I got closer to the door number they had given me, a wave of dread hit me out of nowhere. It wasn't a logical thought. It wasn't based on anything specific I could point to. It was just this overwhelming, instinctive feeling that something was very wrong. The door looked exactly like all the others. Plain, closed, silent. It could have belonged to anyone. This was supposed to be a workplace. My heart started pounding. My palms were sweating. I remember standing there staring at the door and suddenly realizing how isolated I was. No voices, no movement, no sign that anyone else was around. If I knocked and something happened, no one would hear me. That was the moment my instincts took over. I didn't knock. I turned around and practically ran back down the hallway, my heart racing faster with every step. I didn't look back. I just focused on getting to the elevator as quickly as possible. When I finally reached it, I frantically pressed the button, feeling exposed and vulnerable the entire time I was waiting. When the doors finally opened, I stepped inside and hit the lobby button immediately. The ride down felt longer than it should have. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what exactly had scared me so badly. Nothing had technically happened. No one had spoken to me. No one had threatened me. And yet, I felt like I had just narrowly avoided something terrible. When I got back to the lobby, I went straight to the security desk again. I asked the guard, once more, if she knew anything about the company I was supposed to be meeting. This time, her answer was firmer. She said no. She had never heard of them. That only made things worse. I thanked her and left the building as quickly as I could. As soon as I stepped outside into the noise and movement of downtown, I felt a little safer. But the uneasiness didn't disappear. Even as I walked away, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to follow me. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I replayed the experience in my mind, the more wrong it felt. The early phone call, the vague job description, the tiny lobby, the security guard not recognizing the company, the office that looked like an apartment hallway. None of it added up. I started to wonder why I hadn't questioned it sooner. That night, I tried looking up the company online. I searched the name they had given me, the address, anything I could think of. There was almost nothing. No proper website, no reviews, no social media presence that looked legitimate. Just a few vague mentions that didn't really explain what they did. I realized then how close I might have come to something dangerous. I don't know what would have happened if I had knocked on that door. I don't know who would have answered, or if anyone would have answered at all. Maybe it was some kind of scam. Maybe it was something worse. My imagination filled in the blanks in ways that still make my skin crawl. What scares me the most is how easily it could have gone differently. If I had ignored that bad feeling, if I had convinced myself I was just being paranoid, if I had knocked on that door because I didn't want to seem unprofessional or rude. I think about how many people, especially young people looking for work, are taught to push past discomfort and just go for it. How many times are we told that nerves are normal and that opportunities don't come without risk? That day, my instincts told me something was wrong, and for once, I listened. Even now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. The memory comes back unexpectedly, usually when I'm walking past an apartment building or waiting for an elevator. I get that same tight feeling in my chest, that same sense of dread. And I remember how close I came to opening a door I was never meant to open. I'm glad I didn't go in. Whatever was behind that door, I don't need to know. The fear I felt was enough to tell me that leaving was the right choice. And as unsettling as it is to not have answers, I'm grateful that the story ended the way it did, with nothing more than a bad feeling and a lesson I'll never forget. There was a family friend we knew growing up who, even as kids, we understood was having a hard time. We didn't have the words for it back then. But looking back, it's obvious her life was unraveling. She made strange choices, especially with the people she dated. Her boyfriends came and went, none of them feeling stable or normal. Her kids were wild in a way that felt more chaotic than playful. They would shoot airsoft guns at each other and practice martial arts right there in the front yard like it was completely normal. It was odd, but not alarming, at least not to us. Adults around us would shake their heads or make quiet comments, but no one ever said she was dangerous. She was just different, unstable. Someone who had fallen on hard times and didn't really know how to climb back out. As kids, we accepted that. Grown-ups are weird sometimes. Families are different. You don't question it much beyond that. Then one day she moved out. It wasn't gradual. There was no long goodbye or explanation. She just left. She told people she'd be back soon and asked if someone could help take care of her pets in the meantime. She left behind her cats and her dog. Said it would only be for a little while. She sounded rushed, but again, adults are busy, right? My sister and I were 9 and 10 years old. We knew the house. We'd been there plenty of times. We were comfortable with it. So the responsibility of feeding the animals fell to us. Our parents agreed. It didn't seem like a big deal. We were responsible kids. It was a short walk up the street. We'd go together. For about a week, that's exactly what we did. Every day, we'd walk up the road, let ourselves into the house, and spend maybe 20 minutes there. We fed the cats, gave water to the dog, played with them a bit so they weren't lonely. We talked to them like kids do, telling them their owner would be back soon. Then we'd lock up and walk home. Nothing strange happened inside the house. That's the part that still feels unreal. The house felt normal, quiet. Empty, sure, but not threatening. No signs of someone else being there. No noises, no mess. Nothing that would have made two kids think something was wrong. If anything, it felt sad. Like a place waiting for someone who wasn't coming back yet. Then one day, on our usual walk up the street, everything changed. We didn't even make it to the house. The road was blocked. Police vehicles were everywhere. Not just one or two, but a cluster of them. Lights flashing. Officers talking into radios. And then there were people with big guns. Not the kind of thing you see during a normal day in a quiet neighborhood. We froze. As kids, we didn't understand what we were seeing, but we knew it was serious. You don't see that many police unless something really bad is happening. We were confused, scared, and suddenly very aware of how small we were. We didn't go any farther. Adults quickly stepped in and told us to go back home. There was no yelling, no panic directed at us, just firm voices and hands guiding us away. I remember looking back over my shoulder, trying to understand why our normal routine had suddenly been cut off like that. Later, we found out the truth. The woman hadn't left voluntarily. A man she knew, someone from her past, had moved into the house and forced her out. She left because she was scared. She didn't tell anyone what was really happening. Maybe because she was ashamed. Maybe because she didn't know who to trust. Or maybe because she was just trying to survive. That man was on the FBI's most wanted list. He was wanted for crimes involving minors. My parents never told us the details. They didn't need to. Even now, I don't want to know exactly what he had done. Just knowing the category was enough to make my stomach turn. Especially years later when I was old enough to understand what that meant. He had been living in that house the entire time. The entire week we had been going there. Every day, two small kids walked up the street, unlocked the door, and spent time inside a house where one of the most dangerous kinds of people imaginable was hiding. We were alone, vulnerable, completely unaware. The realization didn't hit us right away. At the time, all we knew was that something bad had been stopped. The adults around us were shaken in a way we hadn't seen before. My parents hugged us. Relatives hugged us. Neighbors hugged us. There were a lot of long, tight hugs and quiet voices. I remember feeling confused more than scared. Why is everyone acting like this? Why are they hugging us so much? Why do they look like they're trying not to cry? We didn't fully grasp the implications back then. We just knew we weren't going back to that house. As I got older, the weight of it settled in slowly. I started to understand how close we had been to something truly horrific. How luck, timing, and ignorance had been the only things protecting us. That man could have been there while we were inside. He could have watched us come and go. He could have chosen to do something, and there would have been no one to stop him. The fact that nothing happened doesn't make it less frightening. If anything, it makes it worse, because it means we were safe by chance, not by protection. I think about that woman, too, about what it must have taken for her to leave her home, her pets, her entire life behind, because someone dangerous had taken over her space, about how desperate she must have been, about how alone she probably felt. And I think about my parents, how they must have felt when they found out. The guilt, the fear, the sudden understanding of how badly things could have gone. No parent ever wants to realize they unknowingly put their kids in danger, even when there was no way to know. That's why the hugs were so tight. They weren't just relief. They were terror finally releasing its grip. Even now, when I think back on it, I feel a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude that nothing happened. Anger that someone like that was able to hide in plain sight. Sadness for the woman who lost her home. And a lingering unease at how normal everything seemed until it wasn't. As kids, we didn't walk away from that house feeling scared. We walked away not really understanding anything at all. It took years to realize how close we came to being part of a very different story. One that wouldn't have ended with hugs and relief. That experience taught me something I carry with me even now. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind normal routines, friendly familiarity, quiet houses on quiet streets. Sometimes it lives right where you least expect it, while life goes on as usual around it. And sometimes you only understand how close you were once you're far enough away to finally see it clearly. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I grew up living near a house that has always felt different, even before I knew its history. It's the kind of place that looks normal from the outside, maybe even comforting in a familiar way. But once you know what happened there, it's impossible to see it the same again. The house is over 50 years old now, and today my sister lives there. Long before that, it belonged to my grandparents. It was a central part of our family for a long time, full of memories that should have been warm and safe. But there's another side to it, a darker one. When my grandparents lived there, about 20 to 30 years ago, my grandpa told me something that stuck with me in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. He told me that 3 people had died in that house. Not peacefully, not naturally, violently, tragically, and close together in a way that made it feel like the house itself had absorbed something terrible. The first death was a baby. No one is entirely sure whether the baby was a boy or a girl, but everyone agrees on what happened. The baby drowned in the bathtub. Even now, just thinking about that makes my chest feel tight. A bathtub is supposed to be one of the safest, most ordinary places in a home. Clean water, warmth, care. To imagine something so small and helpless dying there is horrifying in a quiet, suffocating way. After that, the mother couldn't live with it. She ended her life by hanging herself downstairs. I don't know exactly how much time passed between the baby's death and hers. Days, weeks, maybe months. But the way it's always been told, it feels connected, like one tragedy pulled the other into existence. Like grief became something that filled the house and wouldn't leave. People don't like to talk about that part in detail, and I understand why. It's too painful, too personal, too heavy. Then there was the third death. Someone was murdered in front of the back door with a hammer. That detail is the one that unsettles me the most. The back door. Not a bedroom, not a hidden corner. A doorway. A place meant for leaving or entering, for coming home, for stepping into the world. The idea that someone died violently right there, at a threshold, feels symbolic in a way I can't fully explain. Like whatever happened didn't stay contained. Like it crossed the line. When my grandpa first told me this, I was young. Too young to fully grasp what it meant. I remember listening with wide eyes, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. Adults sometimes tell stories that sound exaggerated, especially to kids. I didn't know whether to believe him completely or file it away as one of those strange family tales that grow over time. But the thing is, I didn't just hear it from him. Over the years, I heard the exact same story from at least 6 other people. Not all at once, not in a dramatic retelling, just bits and pieces, shared casually, sometimes when the house came up in conversation. Different people, different times, same details. The drowned baby, the mother who hanged herself downstairs, the murder by the back door with a hammer. They didn't know I'd already heard it. That's what makes it hard to dismiss. When multiple people tell the same story independently, with no reason to lie and no benefit to exaggerate, it stops feeling like rumor. It starts feeling like something real that the community quietly carries, even if no one wants to dwell on it too long. As I got older, the house started to feel heavier to me. Not in a dramatic, haunted house way, more subtle than that. Like the air inside always felt a little thick, like sounds carried strangely, like silence lingered longer than it should. Even when nothing happened, it felt like the house was always aware of you being there. Then there's the photo. A few years ago, my auntie took a picture inside the house. She didn't take it to capture anything paranormal. It was just a normal photo, the kind people take without thinking much about it. Later, when she looked at it, she noticed something that made her stop cold. There was a red face floating on the ceiling. Not a shadow. Not a trick of light that disappears when you squint. A face. Red. Clear enough that you could see the shape, the expression, the presence of it. It didn't look like smoke or reflection. It looked like something that didn't belong there, but was there anyway. When she showed it to people, reactions were immediate and intense. Some people went quiet. Some people got chills. Some tried to explain it away, but their explanations never sounded convincing, not even to themselves. You can usually tell when someone is reaching for logic because they're uncomfortable, not because they truly believe it. I saw the photo myself. That's the part I can't escape. I didn't just hear about it. I didn't just hear someone describe it. I saw it with my own eyes. And once you've seen something like that, once you've stared at it long enough to know what you're looking at, it's impossible to unsee it. It wasn't vague. It wasn't ambiguous. It was a red face on the ceiling where no face should be. Seeing that photo shifted something in me. It made all the stories, all the deaths, all the quiet unease snap into a sharper focus. Suddenly, the idea that the house might carry something with it didn't feel silly or superstitious. It felt plausible. I started thinking about what a house absorbs over decades. People live there. They love. They argue. They grieve. They suffer. They die. Especially in a place where death wasn't peaceful, where it came with panic, despair, and violence. Those emotions don't just vanish. Even if you don't believe in ghosts, it's hard to deny that trauma leaves marks. Maybe not always visible ones, but felt ones. A baby drowning is terror and confusion. A mother hanging herself is grief so heavy it becomes unbearable. A murder with a hammer is rage, fear, and brutality. Those aren't small emotions. Those are extremes. And all of them happened within the same walls. The fact that my sister lives there now adds another layer to it. It's still part of our family. It's still used, still lived in, still filled with everyday routines. Cooking, sleeping, watching TV, laughing. Life continues as it always does, but the past doesn't disappear just because new people move in. Sometimes I wonder if the house is quiet because it's empty, or because it's full. I wonder about the red face, who it could be. The baby, the mother, someone else entirely. Or maybe it's not about identity at all, but about presence. About something unresolved that doesn't know how to leave. I also think about how strange it is that so many people know the story. Stories like that don't spread unless there's truth behind them. People might embellish details over time, but the core stays the same. And in this case, the core never changed. 3 deaths, specific ways, specific locations in the house. That consistency is unsettling. I don't talk about it casually with everyone. Some people don't want to hear things like that. Some people get uncomfortable. Others get defensive, insisting there must be a rational explanation for everything. And maybe there is. Maybe someday someone will explain the photo in a way that truly makes sense. Maybe the stories will be documented somewhere officially. But even if that happens, it won't erase the feeling. Because the feeling doesn't come from one source. It comes from the combination of everything. The age of the house, the family history, the repeated stories, the photo, the way the house feels when you're inside it, especially when it's quiet. Some places carry weight. You don't notice it right away. You don't always feel scared. Sometimes it's just a sense of being watched, or a sense that you're not fully alone, even when you know you are. Sometimes it's nothing more than a chill that doesn't match the temperature, or a sudden urge to leave a room without knowing why. That house has always felt like that to me. Knowing that my grandparents lived there, raised part of their lives there, and carried that knowledge with them makes me think they felt it too. My grandpa didn't tell the story with excitement. He told it plainly, like a fact. Like something you accept even if you don't understand it. And the fact that he wasn't the only one who knew makes it harder to ignore. I don't know what people expect when they hear stories like this. Proof, maybe. A clear explanation, a neat ending. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes all you get is a collection of moments, memories, and experiences that don't fully align with logic but still feel real. The house is still there. My sister still lives there. Life still goes on. But every time I pass by it or think about it, I'm reminded that places remember things. Even when people move on. Even when years pass. Even when walls are repainted and floors are replaced. Some stories don't fade. They settle in. And once you know them, once you've seen what you've seen, you carry them with you, whether you want to or not. This story is something my mother told me, and even now, every time I think about it, It leaves me unsettled in a very specific way. Not because it's supernatural or mysterious, but because it shows how suddenly and completely reality can break in front of your eyes. How one ordinary day can turn into something you carry with you forever. When my mother was in high school, she had a science teacher who, for most of the time, seemed completely normal. Not inspiring, not strange, just average. This teacher had been there for years. She taught the same subject, followed the same curriculum, and behaved the way teachers are expected to behave. She stood at the front of the room, wrote on the board, assigned homework, and graded tests. Nothing about her stood out as unusual. She wasn't especially warm, but she wasn't cruel either. She didn't ramble or say odd things. She didn't lose her temper. She was just there. For a couple of years, she blended into the background of school life. That's what makes what happened so disturbing. One day, during a normal science lesson, the teacher was talking about lightning. Nothing controversial, nothing dramatic. Just a topic straight out of the textbook. My mother remembers sitting there, half listening, half thinking about something else, the way teenagers often do during class. Then the teacher said something that didn't make sense. She told the class that lightning comes from the ground. At first, no one reacted. Kids looked around at each other, unsure if they'd heard her correctly. Most students don't immediately question a teacher, especially in a science class. You assume they know what they're talking about. You assume you misunderstood. But my mother was confused enough to speak up. She raised her hand and asked the teacher to explain. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't sarcastic. It was genuine confusion. Lightning, as far as my mother understood, came from the sky, from clouds, from electrical buildup above, not below. She just wanted clarification. The teacher looked at her, and then she said something that changed everything. She said, "Watch, I'll show you." There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough for the room to feel slightly off. My mother remembers thinking the teacher might be about to do a demonstration. Maybe something with a static electricity. Maybe an experiment. Something visual to make a point. No one expected what happened next. The teacher stepped away from the front of the classroom. She walked into the open space between the desks. Then she got down on her hands and knees. At first, the class was confused. Some kids laughed nervously, assuming this was a joke or some kind of strange teaching method. Others just stared, waiting for an explanation. There wasn't one. Without saying anything else, the teacher started smashing her head against the floor. Hard. Not tapping. Not lightly hitting. She slammed her head down repeatedly, with force. The sound echoed in the room in a way my mother says she will never forget. A dull, sickening sound that didn't match anything that should ever happen in a classroom. For the first couple of seconds, no one moved. Shock froze everyone in place. Teenagers aren't prepared for something like that. Your brain refuses to process it. You tell yourself it has to stop, that someone will step in, that it can't possibly continue. But it did. The teacher kept hitting her head against the ground, over and over. There was no screaming, no explanation, just the motion and the sound. Then it became obvious that this wasn't some bizarre attempt at teaching. It was serious. Blood started to appear. Not a small amount. Enough that it spread across the floor. My mother remembers the smell more than anything. That sharp metallic scent that makes your stomach turn. She remembers kids gasping, someone crying, someone yelling for help. And then it got worse. My mother told me that pieces of tissue and blood were visible. Not in a graphic way she could fully describe even now, but enough to make it clear that the teacher was badly hurt. that this wasn't something you could undo or walk away from. That's when the shock broke. A bunch of students rushed forward and restrained her. They grabbed her arms, held her still, tried to stop her from continuing. Some kids ran out of the classroom screaming for help. Others stood frozen, crying, unable to move. The teacher fought against them, not violently toward them, but desperately, like she was driven by something internal that didn't register pain or consequence, like her body was following an impulse her mind couldn't stop. Eventually, adults arrived, other teachers, administrators. Someone called emergency services. The room was chaos. Desks were pushed aside. Kids were ushered out into the hallway. Some were crying openly. Others were silent, pale, shaking. My mother doesn't remember much after that moment in detail. Trauma has a way of blurring things. She remembers being told to go home early. She remembers her hands shaking when she tried to write later that day. She remembers not being able to concentrate for weeks afterward. She remembers the floor of that classroom in a way she wishes she didn't. What she remembers most clearly is this: she never heard about that teacher ever again. No updates, no explanation, no closure. One day she was just gone. No one came in to talk to the students about what they had witnessed. No counselor sat them down and explained what had happened. No announcement was made. The class was simply reassigned to a different teacher, and life at school continued as if nothing had happened. But for the students who were there, everything had changed. My mother says that after that day, school felt different, less safe, less predictable. Teachers no longer felt untouchable or stable. Authority didn't feel solid anymore. If someone who had stood in front of a classroom for years, calmly teaching science, could suddenly snap like that, then anything felt possible. As she got older, my mother tried to make sense of it. Mental illness, she assumed. A breakdown. Maybe something had been building for years, unnoticed by everyone around her. Maybe she had been struggling silently. Maybe there were signs that no one knew how to read. But the truth is, no explanation ever fully made it better. What haunted my mother wasn't just the violence, it was the suddenness. One moment, the teacher was lecturing about lightning. The next, she was destroying herself in front of a room full of teenagers. There was no warning, no buildup that anyone recognized, no visible spiral. It shattered the illusion that people simply become dangerous or unstable in obvious ways. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they function. They teach. They show up every day. They smile when expected. And then, one day, the mind breaks in a way that no one sees coming. The phrase lightning comes from the ground stayed with my mother for years. Not because it was scientifically wrong, but because of what followed it. It became tied in her memory to the moment everything went wrong, to the sound, to the shock, to the realization that adults aren't always okay, even when they look like they are. She also carries guilt, not because she did anything wrong, but because she was the one who asked the question. She knows logically that it wasn't her fault, that asking for clarification didn't cause the breakdown. But trauma isn't logical. Part of her still wonders if that moment pushed something over the edge. She knows better now, but knowing and feeling aren't always the same. What happened to that teacher remains unknown to us. My mother never found out if she survived, never found out if she was hospitalized, never found out if she received help, never found out if she lived with the consequences of that moment for the rest of her life. She just disappeared from the story. That silence is almost as unsettling as the event itself, because it reflects how things were handled back then. Mental health wasn't discussed openly. Breakdowns were hidden. Incidents were buried. The priority was moving on, not processing. Protecting the institution, not the students. The kids were expected to forget, but you don't forget something like that. You carry it. You carry the image of authority collapsing. You carry the understanding that the human mind can fail catastrophically. You carry the fear that someone can seem fine one moment and be completely gone the next. For my mother, that day became a marker. Before that day, teachers were just teachers. After that day, they were people. Fragile, unpredictable people. It also shaped how she talked to me about mental health later in life. She never dismissed it. Never joked about breakdowns. Never assumed people were exaggerating. She understood in a very visceral way that something unseen can be happening inside someone long before it shows itself. Whenever she tells this story, she doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't embellish it. She tells it plainly, almost carefully, like she's still trying not to disturb something fragile in her own memory. And every time, she ends the same way. She never heard of that teacher ever again. No ending, no explanation, just a door closing and silence. That's the part that lingers with me. Not the violence itself, but the idea that a person can unravel so completely, so publicly, and then vanish from the world's awareness, as if they were erased, as if the moment that defined them for those students didn't matter enough to be acknowledged. It's a reminder that behind everyday roles and routines, people are carrying things we may never see. And sometimes, when those things finally surface, they do so in the most shocking, irreversible way possible. That classroom never became just a classroom again for my mother. It became the place where she learned, far too young, that the mind can be as unpredictable and dangerous as any storm from the sky, and that lightning, metaphorically at least, doesn't always come from above. Sometimes it comes from deep inside, and when it strikes, it leaves scars no one ever really talks about. This is one of those stories that feels especially cruel because it didn't come from some sudden burst of violence or a moment of madness. It came from greed, patience, and manipulation, the kind of danger that grows slowly, quietly, while everyone around it assumes nothing truly bad will happen. It's the kind of story that makes you realize how vulnerable someone can be simply because they are kind, trusting, and unwilling to believe the worst in the people closest to them. My mom told me this story years ago. The man at the center of it was her primary school teacher. Not just a teacher she vaguely remembered, but someone who had left a real impression on her. He was known as a gentle, calm man, patient with children, polite with adults, the kind of person people trusted without thinking twice. He lived a simple life, didn't cause problems, and kept mostly to himself as he got older. By the time this happened, he was already elderly. He lived alone in an apartment on the third floor of a building. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was his home. He had worked hard all his life, saved his money, and lived modestly. He wasn't rich in a flashy way, but he had savings, property, and an inheritance that would be worth something when he passed. To him, that money represented security and peace in old age. To someone else, it represented opportunity. At some point later in his life, he married a woman who did not love him. People around him didn't fully understand the marriage. There was a noticeable age difference, and the woman had a reputation for being difficult. Some thought she was just sharp-tongued or demanding. Others felt something was off, but no one openly challenged it. The teacher himself believed, or wanted to believe, that companionship was better than being alone. He trusted her, or at least he tried to. It didn't take long for her true intentions to become clear. She wanted his money, not slowly, not subtly. She wanted access to his bank accounts, his assets, and his future inheritance. When she realized that marriage alone didn't automatically give her what she wanted, she became angry. She started provoking him, picking fights, insulting him, creating tension in the home. Her goal was to push him into divorcing her, because in a divorce she could claim a share of his money. But the teacher didn't give in. He was stubborn in a quiet way. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he simply refused. He didn't want to lose what he had worked for. He also didn't want to turn his life into a legal battle at his age. Instead, he tried to calm the situation in the way he always had, by reasoning and compromise. He made her a promise. He told her that if she stayed married to him, if she didn't push for divorce, he would leave her a larger share of his inheritance when he died. He thought this would satisfy her. He thought this would buy peace. To him, death felt distant. He wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about stability, about quiet, about getting through his remaining years without conflict. But the woman was not content. Waiting was not good enough for her. Promises were not enough. She wanted control, and she wanted it now. The idea of waiting for an old man to die naturally was too slow, too uncertain, and so she made a decision that changed everything. She invited her two brothers to the apartment. These were not men coming for a polite family visit. They arrived armed with knives. Their purpose was clear. They were there to pressure him into giving up his money immediately. And if that didn't work, to make sure the inheritance would come sooner rather than later. The teacher didn't know this. When the doorbell rang, he opened the door like any normal person would. He had no reason to believe his wife's brothers were coming with weapons. He had no reason to think his life was in danger. He trusted the situation because it was happening inside his own home, involving people he thought were family. The moment he opened the door, everything became clear. He saw the knives. In that instant, whatever illusions he had about his marriage shattered. Fear hit him all at once. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't pressure. This was a threat to his life. He was an old man, physically weak compared to them, trapped inside his own apartment with armed men blocking his exit. He didn't have time to think carefully. He didn't have time to plan. His mind went straight to survival. The only escape he could see was the balcony. In that moment, he made a desperate calculation. He believed that jumping from the third floor might injure him, maybe break a leg or two, but that it would be better than staying inside with people who were clearly prepared to kill him. He chose pain over death, or at least what he thought would be pain. He ran to the balcony and jumped. Tragically, things did not go the way he hoped. As he fell, his body twisted. Instead of landing feet first or on his side, he spun upside down. His head struck the concrete below with immense force. The impact cracked his skull. Death was immediate. There was no second chance, no survival, no recovery. He died alone on the ground below his own home. The woman and her brothers were never prosecuted. Legally, there was no direct physical assault, no stab wounds, no signs that they had touched him. The knives were not used. The law saw an old man who jumped from a balcony. The official record documented it as a suicide. And because this all happened in Morocco, where the legal system is not known for protecting victims or investigating psychological coercion thoroughly, the case went nowhere. There was no justice, no accountability. The woman walked free. Her brothers walked free. And the man who spent his life teaching children, shaping young minds, and living quietly, died in terror because of greed. What makes this story especially painful is how invisible the violence was. There were no bruises to point to, no bloodstains in the apartment, no witnesses to confirm the threat he faced in that moment. But anyone with common sense can understand what happened. An elderly man does not jump from a third-floor balcony for no reason. He does not choose such a violent end, unless he believes staying inside would be even worse. Fear pushed him to his death. The law, however, does not always recognize fear as violence. For my mom, this story stayed with her deeply. It wasn't just a tragic news item. It was someone she knew. Someone who had once helped her learn how to read, how to write, how to exist in the world as a child. To know that his life ended like that, betrayed by the person closest to him, left a scar. For me, hearing it later in life changed how I think about danger. Not all danger looks like an attack. Not all murder involves hands on a weapon. Sometimes people are killed by being cornered, threatened, and pushed into making a fatal decision. Sometimes the law fails because it can only see what is visible, not what is felt. This story also shows how power dynamics work. The man was old. The woman was younger and more aggressive. Her brothers were physically stronger and armed. He had no leverage, no protection. No one checking in closely enough to realize how bad things had become. It's easy to say he should have called someone, left earlier, asked for help. But fear and trust don't work that way in real life. He believed marriage meant safety. He believed promises would calm the situation. He believed that people who smiled at him wouldn't suddenly turn into killers. That belief cost him his life. The idea that this was officially labeled a suicide feels like an extra cruelty. It erases the role that fear and coercion played. It turns an act of desperation into a personal choice, when in reality, it was forced by circumstances created by other people. It also allowed the woman to get exactly what she wanted: money, inheritance, freedom. This is the kind of story that doesn't have a satisfying ending. There is no arrest years later, no confession, no justice served. Just a quiet understanding among those who knew him that something very wrong happened, and nothing could be done about it. It's also a reminder that the most dangerous people are not always strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they sit across from you at the dinner table. Sometimes they share your bed. Sometimes they smile while planning how to take everything you have. And sometimes the system that is supposed to protect the vulnerable simply looks the other way. Whenever I think about this story, I think about how alone that man must have felt in his final moments, how quickly his world collapsed, how trust turned into terror in the space of a few seconds, and how unfair it is that his life ended, not because he did something wrong, but because he trusted the wrong person. It's not a ghost story. It's not a mystery. It's a human story about greed, fear, and a quiet kind of violence that leaves no fingerprints behind. And that, in many ways, makes it even more disturbing. This is one of those stories that feels unreal no matter how many times it's told. It sits in that space between gratitude and grief because it contains both. Gratitude that my family survived. Grief for the man who didn't. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest feel tight because it came so close to changing everything forever. My aunt owns a petrol station. It's been part of our lives for a long time, a place we all knew well and felt comfortable in. It wasn't just a business. It was familiar, safe. Somewhere family members came and went, helped out when needed, and trusted the people working there. One particular day, everything lined up in a way that none of us could have predicted. It was Eid, Most of my aunt's regular staff were Muslim, and since it was an important religious holiday, they weren't working that day. To make sure the station could still run, family stepped in to help. My mom was there, my uncle, my aunt herself, her other sisters too. We are all Buddhist, but that didn't matter. It was just family helping family, covering shifts, doing basic work, keeping things going. No one felt unsafe. It was daytime. People were coming and going. It was business as usual. There was no sense that anything was wrong or about to go wrong. The kind of normal that lulls you into believing nothing bad could possibly happen in that moment. Then the robbers came. They were wearing masks. That alone changes everything. The moment someone covers their face, the rules of reality shift. They aren't just people anymore. They're a threat. They walked into the station while my family was there. My mom, my aunt, my uncle, my relatives, all in the same space, all exposed, all vulnerable. There was security at the station. That security guard would not make it through the day. The robbers were armed, aggressive, and unpredictable. They were this close to taking my family away from me forever. That isn't exaggeration. That is fact. If things had gone slightly differently, if one person had reacted the wrong way, if fear had turned into resistance, my life would have been split into before and after in the worst possible way. My uncle was standing by the door. At some point, the robbers said they were hungry. That detail sounds strange, almost unreal, but it's important. In the middle of a robbery, in the middle of terror, they expressed something human. Hunger. Not rage, not shouting, hunger. And my uncle did something that still amazes me. He gave them food. He didn't argue. He didn't challenge them. He didn't panic. He responded with kindness in a moment where fear would have been the most natural response. He handed them food, and that simple act changed the direction of the moment. They took it, and then they left. They didn't take my family. They didn't drag anyone away. They didn't kill anyone inside the station where my loved ones stood. They walked away from the front. But they didn't leave the property. They went to the back. That's where the security guard was. And there, away from the eyes of my family, away from the place where kindness had just been shown to them, they murdered him. They slashed him to death. A man who was there to protect the place. A man who showed up to work and never went home. That's the part that never sits right. My family lived because of a moment of compassion. Another man died because he didn't have that moment in front of him. The relief and the horror exist side by side, tangled together in a way that never fully separates. How do you feel grateful when someone else paid the price? How do you mourn without also thinking, that could have been my mom, my aunt, my uncle? Afterward, everything was chaos. Police, statements, shock, trembling hands, voices breaking mid-sentence. The station that had always felt familiar suddenly felt stained with something heavy and irreversible. A place where life had gone on quietly now carried the weight of death. There was suspicion. There were accusations. At one point, a staff member was accused of being involved. People talked. Rumors spread. Fear makes people look for someone to blame. But that person was innocent, not guilty. Even now, he still works there. Life somehow continued. The station is still operating to this day. That alone feels surreal. Cars still pull in. People still buy fuel. Conversations still happen over the counter. If you didn't know what happened, you would never guess that someone lost their life there. That my family almost lost everything there. I could share the article about what happened. It exists. It's real. But I don't. The station is still running. People connected to it are still there. And this isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about the reality of how close we came to a completely different life. What stays with me the most is how thin the line was. A few words spoken differently. A different reaction. No food offered. One wrong move. And my family might not be here. At the same time, I think about the security guard. About his family. About the people who waited for him to come home and never saw him again. He didn't get a moment of mercy. He didn't get a chance to escape. His death feels unbearably unfair, especially knowing how close others were to sharing his fate. This story changed how I see people. It changed how I see danger. It changed how I see kindness. I don't romanticize what happened. Kindness doesn't always save lives. It didn't save his. But in that moment, it saved my family. And that truth is something I will carry forever, whether I like it or not. It also changed how I see everyday places. Petrol stations, shops, workplaces. They feel normal until they aren't. Until violence walks in wearing a mask and reminds you that safety is never guaranteed, no matter how familiar the setting feels. Every time I think about it, I feel two things at once: thankful and heartbroken. Thankful that my mom is still here, that my aunt is still here, that my uncle and the rest of my family weren't taken from me that day. Heartbroken that someone else's family wasn't spared. This isn't a story with a clean ending. There's no lesson that fixes it. No justice that makes it right. Just the knowledge that life can pivot in seconds. And sometimes survival comes down to moments that feel too small to matter until everything depends on them. My family walked away alive. Someone else didn't. And that truth never fully leaves you once you know it. This story has always stayed with me because it isn't just about death. It's about waiting. It's about hope slowly fading in complete darkness. It's about people doing everything they could to survive, believing rescue would come, and then realizing it wouldn't. Back in 1851 in New England, a massive construction project began that would change the region forever. Engineers and railroad companies wanted to carve a tunnel straight through the Hoosac Mountains so trains could pass through instead of having to go around them. At the time, this was an almost impossible task. The technology was crude, the methods were dangerous, and safety was barely a consideration. Men were expected to work in conditions that today would be unthinkable. This project became what we now know as the Hoosac Tunnel. From the very beginning, the tunnel earned a reputation for death. Cave-ins, explosions, falling rock, flooding, toxic air, and equipment failures were common. Men were crushed, drowned, burned, or suffocated. Many were immigrants, desperate for work, willing to risk their lives for a paycheck. Over the years it took to complete the tunnel, it's estimated that close to 200 men died during construction. Some records say more. Exact numbers were never perfectly tracked. Because of this, the tunnel earned a grim nickname among workers. Many called it the Bloody Pit. Even after it was finally completed, stories began to spread. Train workers, engineers, and travelers claimed to see shadows moving where no one stood. They reported strange sounds echoing through the tunnel, voices carried by the air, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. Some said they felt sudden cold spots or an overwhelming sense of dread when passing through certain sections. Whether you believe in hauntings or not, there is no denying that this tunnel was built on immense suffering. But among all the deaths tied to the Hoosac Tunnel, one incident stands out as especially horrifying. It happened on October 17th, 1867. On that day, 13 men entered the tunnel to work on blasting through rock. Blasting was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire project. Workers drilled holes into the stone, packed them with explosives, lit the fuses, and then ran. Sometimes the timing was wrong. Sometimes the rock behaved unpredictably. Sometimes things went catastrophically wrong. On this day, they did. An explosion occurred deep inside the tunnel. The blast itself was devastating. But what followed was even worse. The men who were positioned outside the shaft, whose job it was to pull the workers out after blasting, were forced to evacuate immediately. The explosion had caused severe damage. Toxic gases filled the tunnel. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. The pumps that were meant to keep water out of the tunnel were destroyed in the blast. Water began pouring in. The men outside tried to go back in. They attempted rescue after rescue in the days that followed. But every time they entered the tunnel, they nearly passed out from lack of oxygen. Some collapsed and had to be dragged back out. The water kept rising, filling the tunnel faster than they could manage. With the pumps destroyed, there was no way to drain it. Eventually, the rescuers were forced to accept what they believed was the truth. There was no possible way the 13 men inside could have survived. They assumed the men had either died instantly in the explosion or suffocated shortly afterward. With no safe way to reach them, work on that section of the tunnel was suspended. The shaft was sealed. Time passed. Life moved on. The tragedy became another number added to the growing death toll of the tunnel, or so everyone thought. About a year later, work on the tunnel resumed. By then, new pumps had been installed. Water levels were controlled again. Workers slowly made their way back into the sealed section, clearing debris and continuing the long, brutal task of cutting through the mountain. As they advanced, they eventually reached the area where the 13 men had been trapped. That's when they found something no one expected. They found the bodies of the 13 men, but they also found something else. A raft. In the darkness of the tunnel, surrounded by stone, water, and toxic air, the trapped men had not simply waited to die. When the explosion destroyed the pumps and water began filling the tunnel, they adapted. Using whatever materials they could find, they built a raft to stay above the rising water. That single detail changes everything. It means they didn't die immediately. It means they survived the explosion. It means they were alive long enough to think, to plan, to work together, and to hope. They were trapped in total darkness. No sunlight, no clear sense of time, only the echo of dripping water, the smell of damp stone, and the growing realization that no one was coming. They would have had limited air, growing worse by the hour. Hunger would have set in, thirst, exhaustion, fear. But they built a raft. That suggests cooperation, communication, a shared belief that rescue was possible. It's impossible to know how long they survived down there. Days, maybe weeks. There were no clocks, no calendars, no way to mark time. All we know is that they lasted long enough to construct something meant to keep them alive, not something meant to help them die. Imagine what that must have been like. 13 men floating in a pitch-black tunnel surrounded by rising water, sitting on a crude raft, listening for sounds that never came. Every noise would have made their hearts race. Was that a rescue team? Was that a pump restarting? Was that footsteps? Or was it just the mountain settling around them? They likely shouted, likely screamed until their voices were hoarse. They may have tried to conserve air, sitting in silence for long stretches, listening, waiting. They may have argued. They may have prayed. They may have comforted one another. They may have fought despair with stories of home, families, futures they hoped to return to. And slowly, one by one, reality would have set in. The water wasn't going down, the air wasn't improving, no one was coming. Eventually, their bodies gave out. When workers found them a year later, they found 13 men who had died together, not in an instant of chaos, but after a prolonged fight for survival. The raft was silent proof of that fight. Proof that hope existed in that tunnel long after the outside world had given them up for dead. That's what makes this story so deeply disturbing. Not just the deaths, but the waiting. These men didn't die in a sudden accident. They died knowing they were trapped, knowing that rescue attempts had likely been made and failed, knowing that time was working against them. They lived with that knowledge for however long their bodies allowed. When people talk about hauntings in the Hoosac Tunnel, this is often the story they return to. Some claim that when passing through the tunnel, they feel an overwhelming sense of despair in certain sections. Others say they hear voices echoing faintly, even when no one else is around. There are reports of cold air rushing past, like something moving quickly by. Train workers have spoken about seeing shapes near the walls, as if figures are standing just out of reach of the light. Skeptics say these are tricks of the mind. Echoes, air pressure changes, darkness playing with perception. But even skeptics admit this. If any place had reason to feel heavy, it would be this tunnel. The mountain didn't just take lives, it trapped them. It swallowed hope and time along with flesh and bone. The discovery of the raft ensured that the story of the 13 men would never be forgotten. It transformed their deaths from a tragic accident into something far more haunting. It forced people to confront the reality that these men were alive long after the explosion, that they believed for at least some time that they might be saved. That belief makes their deaths unbearable to imagine. It also raises questions that can never be answered. Who died first? Who held on the longest? Did one of them realize before the others that no one was coming? Did they stay together until the end? Or did fear and exhaustion separate them? Did silence fill the tunnel at the end? Or did someone speak last? Those questions linger because there is no record, no diary, no final message. Only bodies and a raft, frozen in time, discovered long after hope had disappeared. When people call the Hoosac Tunnel haunted, it's not hard to understand why. It isn't about jump scares or dramatic apparitions. It's about memory, about suffering embedded in stone, about a place where human endurance met its limit in the darkest possible way. Even today, trains still pass through the tunnel. Passengers sit comfortably, unaware that beneath the steady rumble of wheels lies a history soaked in fear and death. Few think about the men who carved that path with their hands, their lungs, and their lives. Fewer still think about the 13 men on the raft. But once you know the story, it's impossible not to think about them when you hear the tunnel's name. They weren't reckless. They weren't foolish. They were workers doing a job in an era that treated human life as expendable. They trusted that if something went wrong, someone would come for them. For a long time, no one did. And that, more than anything else, is what makes this story so eerie. Not the darkness, not the water, not even the deaths, but the quiet, patient hope of 13 men floating in the dark, believing that any moment, any sound, any vibration could mean rescue, until the moment hope finally slipped away and the tunnel claimed them forever. I went to a place called Camp Joy a few years ago, and at the time I had no idea how deeply it would stay with me. On the surface, it's exactly what you'd expect from a good camp experience. It's in Ohio, which people often joke about as being flat and boring, a place with nothing much to do or see. But Camp Joy felt different. Even now, I'd still say it's one of the best places you can go to in Ohio if you want to feel disconnected from normal life. When I arrived, everything felt peaceful. Trees everywhere, open land, cabins spread out across the property. And that quiet you only get when you're far enough away from roads and towns. The air felt clean. The days were full of activities, laughing, late-night talks, and that strange sense of closeness you get with people you've only just met. Nothing about the place seemed dark or dangerous at first. If anything, it felt welcoming. But camps like that have layers. You never learn everything at once. The real stories come out slowly, usually at night, when people are tired, guards are down, and conversations drift toward things that feel more honest. That's when I started hearing things that changed how I looked at the place. One of the first things I learned was about the lake. There's a lake on the property, and some of the kids sleep in cabins nearby. During the day, it looks harmless. Calm water, reflections of trees, a place where people gather, laugh, and cool off. But according to multiple counselors, 2 kids died in that lake years ago. The details were never spoken about clearly. No one went into specifics about how it happened, just that it did, and that it was serious enough to become part of the camp's unspoken history. What made it unsettling wasn't just the fact that it happened. Accidents happen everywhere. It was the way people talked about it, quietly, carefully, like they didn't want to say too much in case it somehow brought something back. When you're a kid or a teenager, that kind of silence makes your imagination work overtime. Every ripple in the water suddenly feels suspicious. Every shadow near the lake at night feels heavier. Then there was the swimming pool. The pool is another central place at camp. It's where people gather during hot days, where you hear shouting, splashing, whistles, and laughter. It feels safe, controlled, and supervised. But I was told something that made my stomach turn when I first heard it. A goat was buried under the swimming pool. Not nearby. Not somewhere else on the property. Under it. The story, again coming from counselors, was that the goat had been sacrificed or buried there long before the pool was built. No one could give exact dates or names, but multiple people repeated the same detail without changing it. A goat buried under the pool. I remember standing near the pool later that day, watching people swim and trying not to think about what might be beneath the concrete. Whether it was true or not, the idea alone was enough to make the place feel different. Like something old had been sealed under something new, and everyone was just pretending it didn't matter. But the most disturbing thing I learned came after that. Before Camp Joy was ever built, the land was supposedly home to a cult. Not a small group of people with odd beliefs, but a cult that practiced sacrificial rituals. According to reports shared between counselors, rituals took place on the land long before cabins, trails, or activity centers existed. Animals were supposedly sacrificed. Ceremonies were performed. The land itself was considered important to them for reasons no one could fully explain anymore. What made this harder to dismiss was the source. These weren't just rumors passed between campers trying to scare each other. These stories were exchanged among counselors, some of whom had been there for years. Some of them were older, more serious, not the type to exaggerate for fun. When people like that tell you something quietly, without excitement, it hits differently. They didn't say it with fear. They said it like history. Once I knew that, everything around me started to feel layered. The woods weren't just woods anymore. They were something older, something that existed long before camp songs and flashlights and bunk beds. At night, when the wind moved through the trees, it didn't sound the same anymore. It felt deeper, like it carried echoes. There were other stories, too. Some people talked about a wood demon that lived somewhere deep in the forest. Not something that appeared clearly, but something people felt. A presence that made the woods feel wrong in certain areas. Campers would talk about getting sudden chills, feeling watched, or having the urge to leave certain trails quickly without knowing why. There was also talk of a witch's home somewhere in the woods, a place no one could ever quite point to on a map. Some said it was just the remains of an old structure. Others claimed people had seen lights at night or found strange objects nearby. These stories were less confirmed, more whispered, and often changed slightly depending on who was telling them. There were rumors of other deaths, too. Campers getting lost. People disappearing briefly and being found disoriented. Accidents that didn't sit right. But these stories were never backed up the way the lake deaths, the goat, and the cult history were. Even the counselors admitted they couldn't confirm those parts. Still, rumors don't come from nowhere. What made the whole experience strange was that none of this ruined the camp for me. During the day, everything felt normal again. Fun, alive, safe. But at night, especially when walking between cabins or looking out at the tree line, the weight of what I'd learned pressed in. I remember lying in bed, listening to the sounds of the woods. Branches snapping, animals moving, wind shifting. Every sound felt louder than it should. Not because I was scared in a panicked way, but because I felt small. Like I was just passing through a place that had existed for a very long time and would exist long after I was gone. There were moments when I felt watched, but not by something hostile. More like something aware, something that knew we were there. Whether that was imagination, suggestion, or something else entirely, I can't say. But the feeling was real to me in that moment. I also noticed that certain areas of camp felt heavier than others. The lake at night, the woods beyond certain trails, the space around the pool when no one was there. It wasn't fear exactly. It was discomfort mixed with curiosity. The sense that you shouldn't stay too long, even if nothing was happening. When I asked counselors directly about some of these things, most of them didn't deny it. They didn't confirm every detail either, but they didn't laugh it off. Some would say things like, "Yeah, that land has history," or "There are things we don't really talk about with campers." That alone was enough to make the stories feel grounded. By the end of the week, I felt like I was leaving with more than just memories of campfires and activities. I felt like I'd been let in on something hidden. Not a secret exactly, but a truth people only talk about quietly. Camp Joy is still one of the best places I've been in Ohio. That might sound strange after everything I've said, but it's true. The beauty of the land, the community, and the experience itself were real. But now, when I think about it, I think about layers. About how places can be joyful on the surface and still carry dark histories underneath. Whether the cult stories are fully true or partly exaggerated. Whether the goat under the pool was symbolic or literal. Whether the woods hold something supernatural or just human fear, I don't know. What I do know is that the stories didn't come from nowhere. Too many people repeated them in the same way. Too calmly, too consistently. Some land remembers. It remembers what happened before people built over it, renamed it, and filled it with laughter. And sometimes, if you stay long enough, especially at night, you can feel that memory pressing back. Camp Joy gave me joy. It also gave me a deep respect for the idea that even the happiest places can have shadows. and that history doesn't disappear just because we choose to focus on the present. I don't regret going there, but I don't think I'll ever think about that camp without also thinking about the lake, the pool, the woods, and the stories that live quietly between the trees. My great-grandparents owned a fairly large horse farm, and it had been in the family for a very long time. The farm came into their lives after my great-grandfather returned from World War II. During the war, he had worked closely with horses, and when he came back home, that connection never really left him. Horses became more than just animals to him. They were comfort, routine, and a way to rebuild a normal life after everything he had seen. Eventually, he and my great-grandmother built the farm together, and it became the center of their lives. The house on the farm was old, solid, and full of history. It wasn't fancy, but it felt lived in, like it had absorbed decades of conversations, laughter, arguments, routines, and quiet moments. The walls felt thick, the floors creaked in places, and every room seemed to carry its own personality. As a kid, I didn't think much about that. It was just part of visiting family. You accept things as they are without questioning them. As my great-grandparents got older, life slowly changed. My great-grandmother eventually passed away peacefully in her sleep. She died in a small pink bedroom in the house. At the time, I didn't know that detail. I didn't even know which room it was. Death, when you're young, feels distant and abstract, like something that exists only in stories adults tell quietly when they think you're not listening. After she passed, ownership of the house eventually went to my great-aunt. The farm stayed in the family, and visits continued like they always had. When my sister and I stayed over, sleeping arrangements were simple and casual. You slept wherever there was space, sometimes upstairs, sometimes downstairs, sometimes on mattresses pulled onto the floor. No one made a big deal about it. More than once, I slept in that small pink bedroom. At the time, it didn't seem strange. I didn't know its history. I didn't know my great-grandmother had died in that very bed. I just knew that the room made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. Not terrified, not panicked, just uneasy. The first time I slept there, I remember lying in bed feeling like something was off. The room was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It felt heavy. I had this strange sensation that someone was sitting on the edge of the bed, not touching me, just there, present. I remember lying very still, afraid that if I moved, I would somehow confirm that the feeling was real. I didn't see anything that night. I didn't hear footsteps or whispers. It was just a feeling, one that stayed with me even after I fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I brushed it off. Old houses feel weird sometimes. Your imagination fills in gaps when it's dark. That's what I told myself. Sometime later, my mom sat down with me and my sister and asked us a question that caught me off guard. She asked if we had ever felt creeped out in that pink bedroom. The way she asked it was careful, like she already suspected the answer. My sister spoke first. She said the room made her feel like someone was watching her when she slept there, that the feeling didn't go away even when she turned on a light or pulled the covers tighter. When she said it, I felt my stomach drop because it was exactly how I felt too. I told my mom that the room made me feel like someone was sitting on the edge of the bed. I didn't even think about it before saying it. The words just came out. The moment I said it, the room felt closer in my memory, like I was back there again. My mom went quiet for a moment. Then she told us the truth. She told us that my great-grandmother, who we'll call Gigi, had died in that very bed, in that room. Peacefully, yes, but still there. She also admitted that the room had always felt creepy to her as well, even before she had children. She said she never liked being in there alone and avoided it whenever possible. Hearing that explanation sent a chill through me. Suddenly, the feeling had a shape, a reason. It wasn't just imagination anymore. It was connected to a person, a real one, someone I was related to. Someone whose life had ended in that space. I tried to process it logically. People die in houses all the time. It doesn't mean anything stays behind. But logic didn't make the feeling go away. If anything, it made it sharper. Then my mom told us something else. She said she had once talked to her cousin about the room. She asked him if he had ever felt anything strange in there. Without hesitation, he told her, "Yeah, Gigi is watching us in there." He didn't laugh when he said it. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it like a fact. That part stuck with me. Later on, during a more recent trip, I talked to my cousins about it. We weren't even trying to scare each other. It came up naturally in conversation. I asked if they had ever felt weird in that room. Before I even finished the question, they started nodding. They described the same feelings: being watched, a presence, the sense that someone was there, just out of sight. None of us had coached each other. None of us were trying to be dramatic. We had all experienced the same thing independently. That was the trip where things escalated for me. That time I didn't sleep in the pink room. I slept downstairs on a mattress on the floor with my sister. I thought that would make it easier, safer. I thought distance would dull the feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep well. At some point, tired and restless, I went upstairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Everyone else was asleep. The only light came from the kitchen and faint moonlight through the windows. The farm outside was silent, the kind of silence that feels very big when you're awake in the middle of the night. From where I stood, I could see the doorway of the pink room. Even though it had a window and was one of the closest bedrooms upstairs, it looked darker than the rest of the hallway. Not shadowy in a normal way, but dense, like the darkness was thicker there. The light from the kitchen didn't seem to reach it properly. As I stood there, fully awake, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. It was stronger than ever before, maybe because I wasn't half asleep this time. There was no confusion about whether I was dreaming or imagining things. My heart started beating faster, and my skin felt tight. Like it does when you know something is wrong, but you can't explain why. I swear I saw something. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. Then I thought it was shadows. But the longer I stared, the more it looked like the outline of a figure. Not solid, not detailed, just a shape. The height matched Gigi from old photos. The hair shape looked similar too, the way older women often wore it back then. For a brief moment, I thought I saw eyes. That was enough. I felt frozen in place, like if I moved, whatever I was seeing would move too. My mind raced, trying to convince me it wasn't real. Old houses play tricks on you. Darkness distorts things. Your brain fills in patterns. But my body didn't care about explanations. Every instinct told me I was not alone. I backed away slowly and went back downstairs. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just left. Once I was back near my sister, the feeling faded, but my hands were shaking. I didn't sleep much after that. What makes this whole thing unsettling isn't just the experience itself. It's the consistency. The fact that multiple people, across different ages and times, felt the same thing in the same room. The fact that the feeling existed even before we knew the history. The fact that it wasn't violent or threatening, just present. If it is Gigi, I don't feel like she's angry. It feels more like watching, like checking in, like she never really left the room she spent her last moments in. The farm has always been a place of family, history, and routine. Horses still move through the land. People still gather there. Life goes on. But that room feels different. It feels like a thin place where the past presses closer to the present. Some people would say it's imagination. Some would say grief echoes through families and manifests in shared stories. Others would say energy lingers where strong emotions once existed. I don't know which explanation is right. All I know is that feeling doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from recognition, like something familiar, something connected to you, is nearby, watching quietly, sitting at the edge of the bed, standing in the doorway. And once you've felt that, once you've seen what you think you've seen, it stays with you. I don't sleep in that room anymore, not because I'm terrified, but because some spaces feel like they belong to someone else, even long after they're gone. When I was very young, around 4 or 5 years old, something happened that never fully left me. Even now, years later, the memory still feels strangely sharp, like it carved itself into my mind before I even understood what fear really was. At the time, my parents were standing downstairs talking about something that didn't interest me at all. I don't remember what they were discussing. I just remember standing nearby, half listening, half daydreaming the way little kids do. Our house had 2 floors, and everything felt normal, safe, familiar. That's important because nothing about that moment felt like a dream. Up until then, I had never seen a skeleton. I didn't know what they were called. I hadn't watched scary movies, hadn't seen horror cartoons, hadn't been exposed to anything like that. I didn't even have a word for what I was about to see. My world was small and simple, filled with toys, family, and routines. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. It came from my parents' bedroom upstairs. It wasn't slow. It wasn't floating. It was running. I remember looking up toward the staircase and seeing this thing move fast, like it was in a hurry. It ran from one room to another, from my parents' room straight into the spare room where they kept storage. The way it moved was wrong, jerky, and unnatural, like something poorly cut out and pasted into reality. Almost like it didn't fully belong there, like it was layered over the house instead of actually part of it. It looked exactly like a skeleton, bare bones, no skin, no clothes, just a white, bony figure, sprinting across the hallway upstairs. I didn't see a face with expression, but I knew it was something alive, or at least moving with purpose. That's what scared me the most. It wasn't just standing there. It was doing something, going somewhere. I froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there staring, my brain trying to understand what my eyes were seeing. At that age, you don't have logic ready to explain things away. You don't tell yourself it's imagination or stress. You just accept what you see as real, because everything is real when you're that young. Out of pure instinct, I reacted in the only way I could. I'm Latin, and without even thinking, I blurted out a word in Spanish. I said something like huesudo, which basically means bony or skeleton-like. I didn't even know the proper word. I was just describing it the best way my child brain could. I was pointing, trying to tell my parents what I had seen, but the moment was already gone. By the time anyone looked upstairs, there was nothing there. No sound, no movement, no sign that anything had happened. But for me, everything had changed. That night, I refused to sleep alone. I crawled into my parents' bed, shaking, clinging to them, terrified that if I closed my eyes, I would see it again. They tried to comfort me. They told me it was just my imagination, that I must have been confused, that nothing like that could exist. But their words didn't reach the part of me that had already decided the world wasn't as safe as I thought. I didn't stop sleeping in my parents' bed for years. Not weeks, not months, years. I stayed there until I was around 10 or 11 years old. Even as I grew older and understood what skeletons were, even as logic developed, the fear never fully faded. Every time I tried to sleep alone, my mind would replay that moment. The staircase, the hallway, the way it ran, the feeling that something had passed through my house without permission. As if that wasn't enough, my dreams made it worse. For as long as I can remember, I've struggled with strange, vivid dreams. One dream, in particular, came back again and again. In it, a skeleton would grab me and pull me into what I can only describe as a tunnel. It wasn't a normal tunnel. It felt endless, warped, like space itself was bending. The walls moved. The darkness pressed in. And the skeleton wasn't chasing me. It was dragging me. I would wake up sweating, heart racing, convinced for a few seconds that I wasn't really awake yet. Sometimes I'd wake up crying. Sometimes I'd wake up frozen. Unable to move, staring at the darkness of the room, waiting to see if something would appear again. Even now, part of me wonders where that image came from. How does a child who doesn't know what a skeleton is see one so clearly? How does that image root itself so deeply that it follows you into your dreams for years? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was a dream bleeding into reality. Maybe it was a child's brain misfiring. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I don't claim to know the answer. I just know how real it felt. I know that the fear wasn't learned from stories or movies. It arrived fully formed, uninvited, and stayed longer than it should have. Even today, skeleton imagery makes my skin crawl in a way I can't fully explain. Not in a normal, creepy way, but in a deep, instinctive way. Like my body remembers something my mind can't fully process. That moment upstairs, that brief glimpse of something running through my house, shaped my childhood more than most people realize. It stole my sense of safety early. It taught me that sometimes fear doesn't announce itself with noise or danger. Sometimes it just runs past you, disappears, and leaves you to deal with the aftermath alone. I don't expect everyone to believe this story. I'm not even sure what I believe myself. But I know what I saw. And I know that some memories don't fade with age. They grow quieter, maybe, but they never really leave. They just wait, buried under years of normal life until something reminds you of them. And suddenly, you're 4 years old again, standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching something impossible run from one room to another, and realizing for the first time that the world might be bigger, stranger, and darker than anyone ever warned you about. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.